Flights of Fancy, written by Jen Turano, narrated by Andrea Ems. Chapter 1. July 1885, Newport. Wonderful news, darling. I have it on good authority from none other than Mr. Ward McAllister that the Duke of Montrose has taken a special interest in you. With her brief respite from the frivolities transpiring at Mr. Theodore Davis's Newport cottage clearly at an end, Miss Isadora Delafield pulled her gaze from the sight of the moon casting its beams over the ocean. Turning, she discovered her mother, Hester Delafield, advancing toward her over the seashell path that meandered through the back courtyard. Keeping her back ramrod straight, because doing anything less would bring on a certain lecture from her mother, she refused to sigh when she noticed Hester was bubbling with excitement as she stepped directly underneath a gas lamp. "Isn't that the most marvelous news?" Hester all but gushed. "I wouldn't go so far as to claim it's marvelous. Pleasant, perhaps, but you've attracted the notice of a duke," Hester counted, "a circumstance that warrants the word marvelous, especially since I learned of the duke's notice from, again, Mr. Ward McAllister, the social arbiter of our day." Isadora tilted her head. "You may be putting too much stock in Mr. McAllister's assessment of the duke's interest in me. I only recently met the gentleman. It was not as if we spent more than a moment exchanging the expected pleasantries, as I was presented to the duke in the receiving line." Hester lowered herself onto the bench beside Isadora. "From what I understand, the duke lingered over your hand, and, according to my most trusted sources, he's been questioning everyone endlessly about you, which leaves me to believe the gentleman is well and truly smitten." While there was no debating that the duke had lingered over her hand, Isadora was convinced that the lingering had merely been a ruse used by the duke to afford him the luxury of perusing the low neckline of her gown. His gaze had all but devoured her charms, making her so uncomfortable that she'd finally, and with a great deal of determined tugging on her part, retrieved her hand from his, earning a narrowing of the duke's eyes in the process. Because she'd been instructed from a tender age that a lady was not to annoy a gentleman with lofty connections, no matter the circumstances, she'd quickly summoned up her brightest smile, which seemed to have gone far in appeasing the duke's displeasure. He'd immediately returned the smile, shot another gaze to the neckline of her gown, and then, to her utmost disbelief, he'd had the audacity to send her what could only be described as a roguish wink. His boldness, combined with the notion that he was apparently questioning everyone about her, left Isadora with the distinct impression that the man had traveled across the ocean to secure himself an heiress, as many aristocrats were doing these days. Regrettably, he'd apparently decided she was an heiress worthy of his consideration. "I don't have the words to describe how delighted I am by this fortuitous turn of events," Hester continued. "I've always known your beauty and reputation for adhering to the proprieties would land you the cream of the crop. But a duke? Why, I'm all aflutter." She flipped open her fan and began applying it vigorously to her face, the furious fanning displacing strands of dark locks streaked with only a touch of gray that her lady's maid had spent hours arranging. "This is exactly why I've been so earnest with your upbringing. It's also why I insisted you wear that back brace for years, because it's forced you to maintain a rigid posture, which draws attention to your lovely neck. I don't believe the Duke is interested in me because I possess perfect posture." Hester stopped fanning herself. "He's undoubtedly interested in your posture. He's a duke, and as such, he needs a wife who'll do justice to the title of Duchess." She released a throaty laugh. "I don't imagine there are many slouching duchesses to be found over in Britain." "I imagine you're right about that." Hester released a satisfied sigh. "All the dance instructions,